All right, welcome to Navigate STL Schools, a podcast. My name is Staci Allen, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Dr. Kelvin Adams, the superintendent for St. Louis Public School District. How are you doing today, Dr. Adams?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm glad to be here this morning. I guess it's still morning or afternoon.
Awesome. So we ask everybody the same starting question. Tell us about your personal K-12 education experience.
My own personal K-12 education experience is growing up in the lower ninth ward of New Orleans, Louisiana, attending a neighborhood school called McDonald 19, leaving that school and going to a junior high school called Lawless. And then I transferred in my ninth grade year to a school approximately 5 miles from me where I had to catch the bus on a regular basis. And then went to high school in New Orleans as well and graduated from a school called John McDonald. From there, it was about college and going out of town to Northeast Louisiana University, where I majored in elementary education and special education. I went because I thought I was playing basketball on a basketball scholarship. Didn't really materialize, but I really learned how to relate to people who did not look like me, because the schools I went to, K-12, were all schools with 100% African American student body. And so the school I went to in college wasn't, quite frankly, a small percentage. The population was African American. And so it taught me a lot about relationships and how important they were. And then obviously getting my master's degree from Xavier University in New Orleans, or HBU, and University of New Orleans, going on to be a principal, a teacher first about 10 years and a principal. And then obviously coming to St. Louis after spending some time with a guy named Paul Vallis in New Orleans after Katrina, putting in place the Recovery School District, which is a school district that is the only school district in the country that has charter schools as predominant number of schools in the district. And so I've been in St. Louis for the last 12 years and have loved every single day of the work that we've done here.
Awesome. That's amazing. So you talked a little bit about just like your professional journey. Can you tell us about what it is that you do as the superintendent of SLPS and like what inspires you in that work?
This work is really about changing lives, and it's about impacting young people in a way that they need to be impacted, and being an advocate. And so what I do on a regular basis is I manage the day-to-day operation of about a $400 million budget and 67 schools and about 4,000 employees. That's everything from transportation to food service to dealing with unions, dealing with the community, dealing with boards, dealing with the business community, focusing on the curriculum and the kinds of things that teachers and principals need to be successful. And so it's really a hands-on, day-to-day interaction with making sure that the resources and the support that kids in this community needs to have is in place to the degree that it can be, based on the kind of challenges I think this community has. So that's the work I do on a regular basis, and I get up every single morning at 5:30, really excited about doing that work.
Awesome. So what's something unexpected that you've encountered in this job, and why was that significant for you?
I guess, to be totally honest and frank with you, there were really no unexpected things. I kind of expected what occurred. I had spent approximately 11 or 12 months in St. Louis before. If there was anything that I could think that was unexpected, if I could really call it unexpected, it would be I guess the nature of the challenges that Black and brown kids have in St. Louis. I think it's a universal across all urban districts. I think it's acutely more of an issue in St. Louis than I think in other places. Although New Orleans has its own challenges in that space. And frankly, for me, the lack of a strategic plan to try to address it probably would be the real challenge for me.
So, like a hot topic this year has been the consolidation of SLPS and the closing of several schools in the district, and some of them are predominantly in North St. Louis. What do you think that people need to understand about this decision, and what are the plans for reinvestment in North City?
So the second part first, I'll take. I think the plans for reinvestment in North St. Louis cannot be a St. Louis public school plan. It has to be a collaborative plan with the city of St. Louis around, and a community, quite frankly, that what needs to happen in North St. Louis. This is a historical issue. This didn't just happen 12 years ago when I started superintendent. This has been going on for decades around the lack of investment in St. Louis. And so the offshoot of that is that you have less of a population to support the school buildings that are there. And so what happens is you're draining dollars from populations that have the needs that are just as acute as the needs in North St. Louis. And the notion of closing schools was an attempt to try to equalize the playing field, to try to make sure that the resources that were being provided could still be provided to support everybody, but asking families and kids to look at schools that might not necessarily be neighborhood schools for them. And so that was a real challenge for this community. And it has been a challenge, quite frankly, because in my tenure here as superintendent, we've closed over 15 schools. This year was acutely concerning because of the pandemic and all of the things that wrapped around that. But this is not a new story for St. Louis. This is a story that goes back 20 and 30 years about schools being consolidated or closed, historical schools in neighborhoods. And so I am hopeful that this attention, the real focus around this time, will get some kind of different response other than, yeah, we know about it. People upset for 30 or 60 days and then walk away from it. And I'm believing that there may be some opportunity here to take something negative and turn it into something positive long term.
That sounds like a plan. You talked a lot about the history of St. Louis. St. Louis has the first African American high school west of the Mississippi. You talked about the challenges that you faced in the last 12 years, but also the historical challenges, like thinking about just the rich history of education in the city alone, not even the county or the rest of the surrounding state. Like, what do you really think is one of the greatest challenges that is facing educators and the education system in St. Louis today?
A lack of coordination. Really simple. There is a severe lack of coordination. For the first time, I'm at the table with some partners, some other persons, charters, and others alike, some community, advocacy groups as well, having a real deep conversation around that topic with the hope and belief that we walk away with a plan. Whether I like the plan or dislike the plan, it's a plan that we believe, that we collectively believe will support kids long term, such that we are not having these conversations about closing schools. We're not having this conversation about charter against public or traditional schools. We're not having these kind of conversations. We're having conversations about how can we support kids. That is what I think has been lost in this entire conversation over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years. What are we doing to support the kids that have the greatest needs in this community? Obviously, the kids that have the resources, they're going to find a way to align those resources with what kids need. The kids that have the real challenges are the ones that don't have the resources, don't have many options. And while we're fighting, when elephants fight, grass gets trampled. And in this case, the grass is kids, and in this case, the elephants are the big organizations like the St. Louis Public School Districts and others who are aligned to try to continue to do what they're doing without thinking about what's best for kids, at least believing that they're doing what's best for kids, but not necessarily always focusing in a real strategic way around kids.
I agree with you. I think that I've been at some of those tables, and a lot of times people are thinking, what can we do for the kids in the future? And a lot of that has negative impacts for the current kids today. And when I think about one of those biggest things that's like a hot topic now for real is COVID, and how it highlighted the disparities and the equity gaps in the community in general. Like, what would you say is the plan for SLPS or the position that you guys are taking on how you're going to implement those post-COVID measures, and the fact that, like, reading scores for Black and brown students have gone down, math literacy has gone down, all of these things have been widened. Like, where's SLPS at to help kind of bridge that gap that has been exposed and then turned into like a cavern?
I think those are excellent questions you ask, and I'll kind of frame what we are doing. We, as a district, will be receiving approximately $156 million from the 3 iterations of COVID funding, CARES Act funding, if you will. The last iteration, about $103 million. We put out a survey to the community. We received some 2,910 responses that are framed for the board on Tuesday night. And those responses, 70% of them say focus on the needs of the kids. About 25% on facilities, and about about 5% on other. And so at this point in time, we're looking at the data around the survey. We're meeting with all of our principals on next Tuesday. We are meeting with my leadership team on next Monday. We are putting together a committee that will be made up of teachers, principals, the community members, parents, students, to talk about how we leverage these dollars, to your point, to revision what happens in public education in St. Louis Public Schools. Many of my colleagues across the country are doing the same thing, and there are local entities that are doing the same thing, charters as well as some of the regional superintendents in the county. So I think we're all thinking differently about how to attack this issue. I can tell you clearly, one of the things that I think is in the middle of the table is the notion of making sure that kids have the technology resources that they need. I think we could all walk away knowing and believing that for the first time there will be an equalization of technology access for all kids, whether they get hotspots or whether the city is working feverishly to try to make sure there's internet connections across the region such that kids have access to the World Wide Web, because they get the opportunity then to open doors that they would never open. Even though they can't go to Hawaii, they could get online and look at what Hawaii looks like. They could actually see videos and those kinds of things. So the long and short of it is, survey done, meetings taking place over the next 30 to 45 days, a plan being provided to the board on the 13th to the 27th of August, such that they will know and the community will know, giving the community some feedback around how those dollars are going to be used to leverage what's going to happen. Short term, on June 23rd, all districts in the region have to put what their plan is to come back in person. Fortunately, we've already been back in person. We have some 4,210 kids in summer school as of Monday. That number is going to go up after today, I am positive. We expected about 7,000 kids back in person in 32 buildings. And so we are one-to-one with computers and also in person with kids as well. So I think what you're going to see is a plan to try to be much more strategic around supporting the areas of reading, mathematics, and the notion of culture and climate, layered with this issue of layered with the notion of how do we address equity and how do we address trauma in our schools. So those are the five big levers, if you will, if you want to look at it: reading, math, climate and culture, the trauma issue, and the equity issue. Those are the five things that we're going to be focusing on as a district.
So you talked about the 5 things that you're focusing on post-COVID. SLPS had some very strong advocates and some real critics in the city. What do you think is at the heart of the divide, first of all, but outside of just the changes that were kind of forced or brought to light because of the pandemic, what's the long-term plan for SLPS?
So you asked me what I think is at the heart of this issue. If I could answer that question, I would probably be a fortune teller. But using my lens, I think it's race. I think it's poverty. I think it's how charters in the district were put together over the last 12 or 14 years. I think it was done in an adversarial kind of way, no blame to anybody. Legislators made some recommendations and some decisions for Kansas City and St. Louis, because what we get in St. Louis, we're getting in Kansas City, and all urban districts of how this was put together. I think that's the real reason why I think there's a real issue here. And I think at the crux of it is about misinformation. People don't have real accurate information and not willing to listen intently enough to get the right information. And so I am hopeful that this dialogue can get us focusing on the resource that is most important to this community, and that's kids. Not the dollars, not the buildings, not the location where those buildings are, not if there's enough charter funding or enough local funding, not on a desegregation agreement and a lawsuit that's going on with that. I think if we really are intentional around focusing on kids, then we could get to some places that are better than where they are right now.
Okay, then speaking of kids, what do you hope for the future of education in St. Louis? Like, the kids are the future. They need a good education. What's the hope for them?
I think for the first time in a real way, practitioners are having a real conversation around how we can collaborate in a better way. I am hopeful that drives the continued conversation around that. I am not naive enough to believe that it's going to solve the problem. I am nowhere near that naive. But I do believe that there's some opportunities here that have not been here before. I think if we don't, quite frankly, The long and short of it is that kids are going to die. In my tenure as superintendent, I have lost 172 students, 20 students this school year, and 16 staff people because of COVID. And 172 is enough to fill a building, a small elementary school. And so I think the challenge here is we're losing kids every single day. They don't need to have a bifurcated educational system to continue to hurt them as they try to deal with the issues around crime, the issues around poverty, the issue around housing, the issues around homelessness. Those are all things that they're dealing with already. We don't need to add something to the table around this disconnect around how they get in schools, how they stay in school, and what school they go to.
So we know safe schools save lives. We know good schools saves lives. We know that education is a way to alleviate poverty. What do you think parents should be considering when they're choosing a school for their child, or when they are navigating educational spaces that their kids are already in?
I think this is an individual decision, and you have to look at it from that lens. I think we try to lump these decisions into what's best for the institutions and not necessarily what's best for kids. And so I think there are a lot of options out here, whether those options are the district options through magnets and neighborhood schools and programs that exist, or whether there are options in charter schools or private and parochial. I tend to believe that if you give parents the right information, they can make the right kinds of decisions. I get regular emails and texts and have conversations with people no matter where I go around recommendations. And I always tell them, do your research. Um, every school is not the same, and your child may need something different from one school that's not existing in another school. One size doesn't fit all. Um, while you indicated that safe schools don't necessarily change lives, I believe safety plus education makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in places that were considered high poverty with a lot of violence. My school was safe, um, and it also provided the kind of support I needed to thrive in the educational environment. But more importantly, it created the opportunity for me to be supported, to put me sitting in a chair where I'm sitting now. And so I am hopeful that we can have both. I don't believe that you trump one for the other. I think it has to be both.
I agree. So you mentioned supporting families in individual decisions. How do you think community organizations like Navigate STL Schools or anyone else out there can support families in making these decisions, or support the district in helping families find the right fit?
I think number one, it has to be about getting as much accurate information as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I am I am shocked about the misinformation that people have
Mm-hmm.
based on um, second and third party conversations. And so I think the data drives the kind of information that needs to be provided to families. And I'm hopeful that entities like Navigate STL, Bridge to Hope, We Power, and I could go on and on and on, PAC, our own PAC committee, um, are willing to look at the data and then give out the accurate information based on the data, but uniform data, not data skewed around what they think or believe,
Mm-hmm.
but the real accurate data that is equal, meaning that the same data you're pulling from SLPS schools, you're pulling from other schools, or the same data you're pulling from one school, you're pulling from another school at the same grade level, and looking at that data. Obviously, there's always, always, always an asterisk,
Mm-hmm.
and that asterisk also has to be there. And I think sometimes we look at the data outside of the asterisk, and I think that's an important piece that still has to be considered when that data is being provided.
Okay. And when all is said and done, you're the superintendent of SLPS. Why should families choose SLPS for their kids?
I think that's a really easy answer. Number of different options. First of all, I think we recognize and realize that there's some challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not naive enough to believe and put my head in the sand and say that we do not have challenges. We do. I don't think there's any educational institution in the country that would say that they are perfect. We are definitely not that. But I think we have options, and we are open to exploring other options to support kids in a way that they need to be supported. We've opened several schools over the last few years. We have closed schools and consolidated schools if they're not doing well, not just because of attendance, but we've closed schools that are not doing well academically. We are willing to provide the wraparound supports that families need to have: full-time social workers, full-time counselors, full-time nurses moving forward, security in buildings to deal with the safety issue, transportation. And so I think we offer a lot to families. The families have to determine if that is what they need, or is it enough? We're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and so we can't solve every problem that a parent brings to the table. I received an email on yesterday, a family who had gone to another school in a different kind of environment, say, "Hey, I thought it was going to be this, and I'm not pleased. Can we come here?" I get just the opposite of some saying, "Hey, I was in this school. It was a magnet school program. I'm not satisfied. I'm looking to leave to go here." That happens on a regular basis, and parents need to be supported when they make those kind of decisions with their feet. If those decisions are being made on data, not on what they hear or believe or think. And so I think it's an easy answer to the question, because I think we have a history in the district of trying to be supportive of families. And as you indicated, St. Louis Public Schools, first African American school west of the Mississippi, first kindergarten. And so innovation is part of the history of the district. And I think that there's some opportunities here to continue to be innovative to try to support families.
Awesome. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you guys for listening, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.